Blood pooled across the floor, chaos echoing through the field hospital. In the middle of the storm stood Anna Mercer, hands stained with blood, scrubs soaked, exhaustion carved into her face. For 18 relentless hours, she never stopped, stitching, bandaging, willing soldiers to live when others froze. Then as her knees began to give way, a Marine stepped forward. He snapped to attention, raised his hand in a sharp salute, and his voice thundered through the silence. Ramadi Medic! The entire room froze. Who was this quiet nurse the Marines treated like a legend? And what secret did she carry that no one else had seen? Stay with us, because her story will change the way you think about heroes forever. Anna Mercer never sought attention. At 29, with her brown hair tied back in a simple ponytail and her petite frame hidden inside standard-issue scrubs, she looked like any other nurse walking the sterile halls of the military medical facility. She moved quietly, almost like a shadow, gliding from room to room with a clipboard in hand, adjusting IV drips, checking blood pressure, and whispering a few steady words of reassurance to patients who trembled on their beds. To most of her colleagues, she was unremarkable, present but almost invisible, competent but never the first name anyone mentioned when speaking of talent. Whispers circulated in break rooms and hallways. She's too soft, one doctor muttered as Anna leaned over a patient's bedside, carefully retaping an IV line so it wouldn't tug against tender skin. Another replied with a chuckle, "Yeah, I doubt she could handle real trauma cases. Nurses like her burn out fast." These weren't cruel comments, just casual dismissals, the kind that pile up until they bury a person's worth. For Anna, it was background noise. She heard it, felt it, but rarely responded. Silence had become her armor. During lunch breaks, when the younger nurses clustered together, gossiping about commanders or debating career tracks, Anna sat alone at the corner of the cafeteria, eating slowly while flipping through pages of a worn medical journal. She wasn't antisocial, she just didn't see the point in competing for attention. Her value, she believed, was proven in the details, like the way she always arrived 30 minutes early to replace wilted flowers on patients' nightstands, to fluff pillows, or to fill water pitchers before the first morning rounds. No one asked her to do it, and most never noticed. But for Anna, it mattered. That invisibility extended even to the doctors who worked beside her. One afternoon, Dr. Richardson ripped his lab coat on a cabinet handle, grumbled about it, and left it draped in his office. The next morning, the coat hung back on his rack, neatly mended with such fine stitches that the tear was nearly invisible. He never knew it was Anna who had stayed up the night before repairing it, her fingers working with the same precision she used on sutures. Her acts of care were constant and uncelebrated. When a teenage recruit woke screaming from nightmares, Anna was there with tea and a calm presence that soothed what sedatives couldn't. When a young Marine cried quietly because he missed his girlfriend, Anna sat with him and helped him draft a letter. She gave time in a world where everyone else gave speed. Yet despite all this, her colleagues labeled her just a nurse. The phrase lingered like a quiet insult, minimizing her presence to a support role as though she were an accessory rather than a necessity. They didn't see the way she carried herself, with the posture of someone who had been forged in fires they couldn't imagine. They didn't know that in the pocket of her scrubs, she kept a faded, blood-stained bandage, a relic from years before, a piece of Ramadi she never spoke about. This is where the contradiction lived, in the silence between her modest actions and the unspoken truth of her past. Anna had once served in places where the line between life and death blurred daily. She had worked in desert tents where the air reeked of cordite and diesel, where helicopters thudded overhead and the ground shook with distant artillery. She had been there when soldiers screamed for help in the middle of gunfire, crawling through rubble to reach them. And she had been the one whose hands didn't shake, whose stitches held, whose calm voice pulled men back from the edge of panic. But none of that was visible in the corridors of the present. She allowed herself to fade, to exist as the quiet nurse who clocked in, did her job, and went home. Why? Perhaps because she had learned that true strength does not always announce itself, or perhaps because carrying a legend is too heavy when all you want is to keep moving forward. Anna's invisibility was not unique. Society often underestimates the quiet figures who keep everything running. We praise the surgeon for dramatic operations, but forget the nurse who stayed through the night. We admire the general for orders, but overlook the medic who kept soldiers alive to hear them. Consider the custodian cleaning hospital floors at 3 a.m., the teacher buying notebooks for a student, the caregiver holding a trembling elder's hand. These small, unseen acts are true heroism, and Anna Mercer embodied them. So when her colleagues dismissed her as too gentle, too quiet, they made the same mistake society repeats, mistaking silence for weakness. They couldn't see that resilience often whispers, and that Anna carried within her the history of Ramadi, a secret soon to return when chaos struck again. Anna Mercer kept many things to herself. She rarely spoke in meetings, avoided gossip, and when asked about her personal life, she gave vague answers that revealed nothing. But there was one detail, so small most would never notice, that hinted at a story much larger than her quiet presence allowed. In the left pocket of her scrubbed top, tucked carefully beneath gauze pads and alcohol swabs, she carried a strip of faded fabric, an old blood-stained bandage. The cloth, once bright white, had long since turned the color of rust. It wasn't there for utility anymore. It was a talisman, a reminder, a silent companion to every shift she worked. On the rare occasions when the ward fell into silence, between the end of one emergency and the beginning of another, Anna's hand would drift toward her pocket. Her fingers would close around the fabric, pressing gently as though drawing strength from it. No one else noticed. To her colleagues, she was merely adjusting her scrubs or checking for a pen. But that tiny ritual kept her anchored to a memory most people would never dare revisit. That bandage had come from Ramadi. Years earlier, Anna had walked the streets of that city, once bustling with life, then turned into a furnace of dust, fire, and fear. She had worked in makeshift aid stations where the air was thick with smoke and the walls shook from distant artillery. She had crawled on her knees across broken pavement to reach wounded Marines, pulling them to safety while gunfire echoed around her. That strip of cloth had once soaked up the blood of a young private whose life she fought to preserve under the worst of conditions. She had kept it, not as a morbid souvenir, but as a vow, a reminder that every life mattered, even when chaos tried to convince her otherwise. Yet Anna never spoke of Ramadi. She didn't wear medals, didn't mention deployments, and didn't correct the colleagues who dismissed her as just a nurse. In her silence, she embodied a truth many veterans understand. The deepest scars are often carried quietly, out of sight. Some people return from war, eager to tell stories, to prove they survived. Others, like Anna, return determined to disappear into ordinary life, hiding the weight of what they endured. There's something profoundly human about that choice. We often assume heroes want recognition, but the opposite is usually true. Recognition can feel like exposure, like reopening wounds that barely closed. By hiding her past, Anna wasn't denying it. She was protecting herself and perhaps protecting others from the heaviness of what she had seen. This brings us to a larger reflection. Countless veterans walk among us in silence. They stock shelves at grocery stores, fix our cars, or teach our children. To us, they might seem ordinary, even unremarkable, but behind their eyes are memories of nights spent under mortar fire, of carrying wounded comrades across open ground, of watching friends breathe their last. Many of them will never speak of it. They blend into daily life, preferring anonymity to the awkward stares and half-understood sympathy of those who cannot imagine what combat demands. Anna embodied this reality. Every time her colleagues underestimated her, she let it pass. She didn't need to correct them because she knew who she was. And in the moments when doubt crept in, when she questioned whether her quiet contributions mattered, her hand would brush that faded bandage, and she would remember Ramadi. She would remember the soldiers who had called her by a name she never shared back home, the Ramadi Medic. There's irony in how easily society confuses volume with value. The loudest voices often earn the most attention, while the steady hands keeping everything together remain invisible. But in war, it isn't volume that saves lives. It's composure under fire. It's quiet decisions made with precision when panic would mean death. That was what Anna had learned in Ramadi, and it was what she carried with her into every shift, even if no one else could see it. Imagine how many people you've met in your life who carry something similar, a hidden token, a scar, a ritual no one else notices. Maybe it's the firefighter who still checks the exits in every building he enters. Maybe it's the teacher who wears a bracelet belonging to a student she lost. Maybe it's your neighbor who smiles politely at barbecues, but carries the memory of a battlefield thousands of miles away. Their silence doesn't mean they lack stories. It means the stories are too costly to tell. For Anna, the silence was her shield, but also her strength. Every patient she cared for, every wound she dressed, every frightened young soldier she reassured, those actions were rooted in experiences no textbook could teach. Her colleagues might not have understood it yet, but her calmness in crisis wasn't the result of training alone. It came from surviving nights in Ramadi when chaos was constant, when survival was uncertain, and when her ability to keep breathing meant someone else might too. The old bandage in her pocket wasn't just cloth. It was memory, identity, and purpose woven together. It reminded her that being underestimated was not a weakness. It was an advantage. Because when people expect little from you, they never see the moment coming when you rise and change everything. And soon, that moment would come again. It was 3 a.m. when the first sound shattered the silence. The screech of tires against asphalt, followed by the pounding of boots and the metallic rattle of stretchers being rushed inside. The loudspeaker crackled to life. Multiple casualties inbound. All hands to emergency. In an instant, the sterile calm of the hospital dissolved into chaos. Doctors stumbled from their on-call rooms, still pulling on coats. Nurses scrambled to prepare stations, their voices high with panic. The air filled with overlapping orders, shouted questions, and the deep groans of wounded soldiers being wheeled through the double doors. Blood streaked across the polished floors, leaving a trail from the entrance to the trauma bays. And there, in the middle of the storm, stood Anna Mercer. Her body jolted awake before the announcement even finished. Years in Ramadi had trained her to sleep with one ear open, to move before her mind fully registered danger. By the time the first gurney rolled through the entrance, Anna already had her gloves on and her hair tied back. She didn't hesitate, didn't falter. She moved with a kind of instinct that came only from surviving nights when hesitation meant death. The scene was overwhelming. Every stretcher carried another wounded Marine. Some screamed, clutching blood-soaked uniforms. Others lay silent, eyes half open, fighting to stay conscious. The smell of diesel, gunpowder, and iron mixed into a suffocating fog. The fluorescent lights buzzed above, harsh and unyielding, as if even the building itself understood that sleep would not return tonight. Dr. Richardson stood frozen at the trauma bay entrance, his face pale. "This is too many. We don't have the staff for this." Dr. Martinez backed away, muttering, "We need to transfer. Call for backup. This is beyond capacity." And that was when Anna stepped forward. Her voice was quiet but steady, slicing through the panic. "No, we handle this now." The doctors turned, stunned, as she began to move through the room with purpose. "Red tags, Trauma Bay 1. Yellow tags, hold here. Green tags, anyone who can walk, against the far wall." Her commands were sharp, efficient. For a moment, even the chaos seemed to pause, waiting for her direction. Richardson grabbed her arm. "Nurse Mercer, you can't just start making decisions. We follow protocol." Anna's eyes flashed. Protocol doesn't save lives when people are bleeding out. In them, she pulled free, her gaze already scanning the next patient. Pressure here, tourniquet there, IV line ready. Her hands moved with the steadiness of someone who had done this exact dance 100 times before, because she had, in Ramadi, in tents filled with more wounded than beds, in alleys where bullets cracked overhead while she crawled toward the fallen. The young resident, Dr. Peters, stared at her. "Who gave you the authority?" Anna didn't look up from the intubation she was performing. "The dying did, unless you want to explain to his wife why we let him go while we argued." Those words silenced the room. Authority wasn't declared. It was earned in real time through action. And Anna was proving, second by second, that she knew how to hold a line when everyone else faltered. The hours blurred together. 6, then 10, then 15. Convoys kept arriving, delivering wave after wave of wounded. Every time the staff thought they were caught up, another flood came. The air was thick with the rhythmic beeping of monitors, the cries of patients, and the shuffle of exhausted feet. Anna moved like a force of nature. She sutured wounds, stabilized fractures, directed younger nurses, and steadied the hands of doctors who were shaking with panic. When equipment ran low, she improvised, turning scraps of fabric into pressure dressings, rigging IV poles from broom handles. When a 19-year-old Marine begged, "Am I going to die?" Anna knelt beside him, eyes steady. "Not on my watch. Tell me about home." Her voice pulled him back from the edge as her hands worked furiously to save his shattered leg. By hour 12, the staff began to realize something extraordinary was happening. The woman they had once dismissed as too soft was holding the entire ward together. She wasn't just reacting. She was orchestrating, reading the chaos like a battlefield map, staying 3 steps ahead while others stumbled behind. Janet, the senior orderly, whispered to a colleague, "Look at her hands, no tremor. And her eyes, she's seeing things we're not." And this is where the deeper truth comes in. Leadership doesn't always wear a title. It isn't about stripes on a sleeve or letters after your name. Real leadership reveals itself in crisis, in the moment when structures crumble and someone has to step forward. Anna didn't ask for the role. She became it because she refused to let fear dictate her actions. By hour 15, the cracks showed. Her scrubs were soaked with blood, sweat clung to her skin, and her hands trembled faintly from exhaustion. But she didn't stop. When Dr. Peters collapsed from fatigue, Anna slid into his place without missing a beat, performing chest compressions until the soldier's heart monitor flickered back to life. "Come on," she whispered. "Your fight isn't over yet." Her voice cracked, but her hands never faltered. Richardson watched from across the room, his earlier arrogance replaced by something closer to awe. He had once dismissed her as just a nurse. Now he saw the truth. She wasn't simply treating patients. She was orchestrating salvation. The night stretched on, endless, merciless. By hour 18, Anna's vision blurred at the edges, her legs felt like lead, and every muscle screamed in protest. And yet she kept moving. When her strength wavered, she reached into her pocket and touched the faded bandage from Ramadi, drawing silent strength from the memory of other nights, other soldiers, other battles she had refused to lose. This is where her true resilience emerged, not in her ability to avoid exhaustion, but in her refusal to let exhaustion dictate her choices. Courage is rarely about grand gestures. More often, it is the stubborn decision to keep going when everything inside you demands that you stop. By the time the clock struck the 18th hour, the last of the stretchers had been treated. 32 lives saved, countless wounds stabilized. The ward was quiet again, filled only with the rhythmic hum of machines keeping soldiers alive. Anna stood over the final patient, her knees finally buckling. She caught herself against the cold metal table, her chest heaving, her palms slick with blood not her own. Around her, colleagues watched in silence. They knew finally what she had carried all along. That night revealed a timeless truth. Real leadership doesn't wait for permission. It doesn't appear in order, but in collapse. Anna Mercer became the anchor because she refused to quit, even when her body begged her to. In her steadiness, others found courage. In her silence, they found direction. Leadership is not the loudest voice. It's showing up when it matters, with steady hands when others tremble. On that night, Anna was more than a nurse. She was the storm's calm, the unyielding center. And though few would say it aloud, they knew. Without her, the night would have broken them all. The clock read 9:43 p.m. 18 relentless hours had passed since the first convoy screeched to a halt outside the hospital. 18 hours of blood, stitches, compressions, and whispered promises to men barely clinging to life. Anna Mercer's body had reached its breaking point. Her scrubs were stiff with dried blood, her hands trembled from fatigue, and her vision blurred as she tried to tie off one last suture. She caught herself against the cold metal of an examination table, her chest heaving with ragged breaths. Around her, the ward slowly quieted, the chaos settling into a fragile calm as machines hummed and soldiers, alive because of her, rested under dim fluorescent lights. For a moment, Anna allowed herself to close her eyes. She had given every ounce of strength she possessed. Perhaps now, finally, she could sit, if only for a few minutes. But then she felt it, a presence behind her. She turned slowly, expecting another request, another patient in need. Instead, she found a Marine standing tall at the center of the room. He was older than most of the wounded, his temples graying, his uniform still sharp despite the long night. His posture was rigid, his expression unreadable, but his eyes were locked on the faded bandage tied around Anna's wrist, damp with sweat and stained from long ago. Recognition flared in his gaze. And then, without hesitation, Staff Sergeant David Ruiz snapped to attention. His hand rose in a perfect salute. His voice cut through the stillness, carrying across the room with the weight of memory and respect. Ramadi Medic. The words landed like thunder. Every sound in the ward stopped. The shuffle of feet, the clatter of instruments, even the low murmur of patients. Silence spread like a wave as heads turned toward Anna, then back to the Marine who had named her. Anna froze. She hadn't heard that name in years. In an instant, memories came rushing back. The streets of Ramadi choked with smoke, the screams of the wounded, the heat of desert nights where death seemed certain. That bandage had been her anchor ever since, but she had kept its story locked away. No one here knew who she truly was, until Ruiz spoke the words aloud. Dr. Richardson blinked in confusion. Ramadi Medic, what does that mean? Ruiz didn't look at him. His eyes never left Anna. It means she isn't just a nurse. She's a legend. He stepped forward, his voice thick with conviction. Ma'am, I was there. Ramadi 2019. You saved my squad leader's life. You saved dozens of us. We never knew your real name. We only knew you as the one who appeared in the worst firefights, crawling through gunfire to reach us. We called you the Ramadi Medic. Gasps rippled through the staff. Nurses who had doubted her, doctors who had dismissed her, even the patients who had been too dazed to notice. Every face turned toward Anna with a new awareness. She stood motionless, her body trembling not just from exhaustion, but from the weight of a truth she had worked so hard to bury. Her lips parted, but no words came. Ruiz held his salute, unwavering. You kept us alive when everything else was falling apart. I made it home because of you. We all did. And now I see you here again, doing the same thing. Tonight proved it wasn't just Ramadi, it's who you are. Around them, the wounded soldiers who were awake shifted in their beds. One young Marine whispered, She's the one they talked about? Another, voice hoarse, said, My CO mentioned her. Said there was a medic who never gave up, even when the city burned. The revelation rippled outward. Anna, the quiet nurse who sat alone at lunch, who mended lab coats without thanks, who treated every wound as though it were sacred, she was the same woman whispered about in barracks across 2 wars, the ghost who saved lives and vanished without fanfare. Dr. Martinez swallowed hard. All this time, and we never knew. Anna finally found her voice, soft but steady. Ruiz, you made it home. His eyes glistened. Because of you, ma'am. Because of you. For once, Anna could not hide. She had been exposed not by her own words, but by the recognition of another who had carried the memory all these years. And in that exposure, something powerful happened. The room changed. No one looked at her as just a nurse anymore. They looked at her as someone who had carried others through the fire and who had done it again tonight. What happened in that room revealed a truth beyond the battlefield. Many of the world's most vital contributions go unseen. Caregivers, nurses, teachers, first responders. They labor quietly until someone chooses to recognize them. Anna never sought applause, but Ruiz's salute wasn't applause. It was acknowledgement, proof that silent sacrifice had not been forgotten. Genuine recognition has the power to transform, to validate the invisible, and to remind us that true heroism is not in loud voices, but in the endurance of quiet strength. The ward remained hushed for several long moments after Ruiz lowered his hand. The staff shifted uneasily, realizing how blind they had been. Patients who could move raised shaky hands in gestures of thanks. A young Marine, tears streaking his face, whispered, You saved me tonight too, ma'am. You're still the Ramadi Medic. Anna took a slow breath. The weight of exhaustion pressed on her shoulders, but for the first time that night, she allowed herself a faint smile. She looked at Ruiz, then at the soldiers around her. I did what anyone would do. Some, but the room knew better. They had seen enough to understand that her humility was part of her strength. On that night, in that ward, Anna Mercer was no longer invisible. She was a living reminder that sometimes the quietest person in the room carries the greatest story of all. The ward had quieted. Machines beeped steadily, soldiers rested, and the blur of chaos finally eased into calm. In that silence, Anna Mercer sat slumped in a chair, her shoulders sagging under the weight of 18 brutal hours. She thought she might finally vanish again into the background, but the room would not let her. Dr. Richardson approached first, his voice low, almost reverent. "Anna, I owe you an apology. We all do." Gone was the arrogance of a man who once dismissed her as too soft, too invisible. Now his eyes carried both guilt and respect. Dr. Martinez added quietly, "What you did tonight, that wasn't just nursing. That was something else entirely." Anna looked up, exhaustion etched deep into her face. No apology needed. We all did our jobs. But everyone present knew the truth. Her job had become something far greater. One by one, the soldiers began to show their gratitude. Private Thompson, barely 19, hobbled forward on crutches. He placed a small, wilted flower, plucked from the hospital courtyard, on her desk. "Ma'am," he whispered, "we're alive because of you." Corporal Williams, chest wrapped in thick bandages, left her a scribbled note. "You gave me a second chance to see my daughter grow up." Others reached for her hand, offered quiet nods, or whispered thanks with tears in their eyes. Staff Sergeant Ruiz returned, his voice steady but full of emotion. "Ma'am, what you did in Ramadi and what you did here tonight, it created lives that wouldn't exist without you. Husbands, fathers, families. That's a legacy." Anna rose slowly, every muscle aching. She looked at him, then at the room full of faces watching her with reverence. She spoke softly, but every word carried weight. "The heroes," she said, "aren't the ones who get remembered. The real heroes are the ones who show up tomorrow and the day after that and keep showing up until there's no one left to save." The room fell silent again. Not from shock this time, but from respect. Anna's words echo far beyond military walls. They remind us that heroism isn't about medals, fame, or the spotlight. True heroism is persistence, the willingness to keep showing up when no one notices. And this is where her story touches all of us. Because not every battlefield involves bullets and blood. Sometimes it's the hospital floor scrubbed at 3 a.m. by a custodian no one thanks. Sometimes it's the teacher staying late to tutor a struggling student without extra pay. Sometimes it's the neighbor shoveling snow from an elderly woman's driveway before dawn. These are the Ramadi medics of everyday life. People whose names aren't known, whose actions aren't celebrated, but whose quiet choices keep the world standing. Society often overlooks them. We hand awards to celebrities for speeches, but forget the nurse who holds a dying patient's hand in silence. We cheer for leaders who speak loudly, yet rarely honor the ordinary people who keep communities alive through small, unseen acts. Anna's story confronts that blindness. It reminds us to look closer, to notice the invisible strength around us. So the question is no longer just about Anna Mercer. It's about us. In your life, someone may need a Ramadi medic, someone who shows up when everyone else steps back, who steadies the moment when fear or despair threatens to take over. The challenge is simple yet profound. Are you willing to be that person? Are you willing to be the quiet strength for your coworker facing a crisis? The calm hand for a friend overwhelmed by life? The neighbor who notices instead of turning away? Heroes don't always arrive in uniforms. Often they arrive in silence, through consistency, through love disguised as ordinary acts. So I ask you directly, are you ready to become someone's Ramadi medic? As we close this story, let's pause and reflect on what Anna Mercer truly represents. She was never the loudest voice in the room, never the one demanding recognition. Yet in silence, she carried lives forward. That kind of heroism doesn't end on a battlefield or in a military hospital. It continues here, in our everyday American lives. Think about it. The paramedic who answers a 2 a.m. call, not knowing what waits on the other side of the door. The teacher in a small town who buys school supplies out of her own paycheck. The church volunteer who drives meals to shut-ins, even when the weather is bitter cold. These are not extraordinary headlines. They are ordinary acts that keep families and communities alive. Anna's story reminds us that recognition matters, but it doesn't have to be grand. A salute, a thank you, a moment of seeing someone's effort for what it truly is. In a world quick to celebrate celebrities, maybe the challenge for us is to notice the quiet ones, to honor them while they are still here with us. And here's a question worth discussing. In our modern culture, are we giving enough value to those silent heroes? Or are we too distracted by noise, fame, and speed to see them clearly? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Share a story of someone in your life who embodies that spirit. A nurse, a veteran, a neighbor, even a family member. Thank you for spending these moments with this story and for keeping the memory of people like Anna alive. If this touched your heart, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who could use encouragement today. Because somewhere in America tonight, another Ramadi medic is quietly showing up. Unnoticed, uncelebrated, but saving lives in ways that will echo far into the future. And maybe, just maybe, the next one could be you.